Huawei's P30 Pro has landed. It's the sequel to last year's very impressive P20 Pro, which wowed us with its smartphone camera chops. It had impressive low light and a very useful hybrid zoom. And guess where we are yet again? This time with better weather and a better phone. But the big question is, can Huawei finally beat the Pixel 3? Let's try it out. Surely on the numbers front, the P30 Pro has the edge. We're talking about a quad camera setup this time around. That includes a new 40 megapixel sensor with optical stabilization. Next up, we have a telephoto lens that's 8 megapixels, but again, has optical image stabilization. And rounding off the first trio, we have a ultra wide angle lens that will help also with your macro shots. The final, fourth, and new camera is actually a time of flight camera. Now that will help not only with augmented reality apps, more on that later, but also on detecting distance and helping get a really killer bokeh effect on your portrait photos. But let's go back to what I think is the best new feature here. It's that telephoto lens. We're talking of up to 5 times optical zoom this time around. Huawei has tapped into a very cool, innovative new periscope style of lens, which means there's more space inside the phone for getting better optical zoom. In comparison, last year's P20 Pro only had 3 times optical zoom, while the iPhones are still using just 2 times. In short, it means you can get really much more up close and personal with people, with buildings, with exactly everything you want to be shooting. And so there's the Eiffel Tower. That's roughly 1/3 of a mile away. Oh, well, we're in France, so half a kilometer. And yeah, this doesn't exactly make for a killer Eiffel Tower shot. So here's the 1x zoom. Now this is where things get interesting. On the bottom here, there's a row of zooming options. So if we tap here, we get the 5 times optical zoom. Now already we're getting a killer shot of the Eiffel Tower. It looks like we're much closer. And after you take the photo, it sharpens it as well. It takes a bit of processing time, but it also means you end up with a far more attractive shot. So that's the 5 times zoom. But Huawei has also introduced an even more impressive hybrid zoom. This time that comes up to 10 times. And you get some really incredible detail on the Eiffel Tower now. It looks like we're 100 meters away or maybe even less. And this combines all the sensors. We're talking about the 40 megapixel sensor as well as a telephoto, combining their features and skills to make a photo that just really wows. And 10 times zoom is pretty incredible. You'd be hard pressed to find that on a compact camera these days. In that quad camera setup, the 4th camera isn't really a camera in the traditional sense. It's actually a time of flight sensor that is able to detect distance of objects. What does that mean? It means you'll be able to detect objects that are in the foreground and in the background and where your subject is in between all of that, and make sure your subject stands out pin sharp. It means really good bokeh effects. As you were doing some street photography here in Paris, you could really lock onto people's faces very quickly, and that incredible hair detail that was teased at the Huawei press launch actually happened. Take a look at these photos. The background is blurred. Steve, our camera guy, is also blurred in the foreground, but the subject right in the center is still crystal sharp. It's pretty incredible stuff. Now the bokeh effect still looks a little touch unnatural, but compared to other camera phones, it's completely nailing it. Impressive results aside, my main takeaway from these new bokeh effects is how much Huawei has moved along in making its camera features easier to use. But enough about the quad camera setup on the back. What about the selfie camera on the front? This time around it has a 32 megapixel sensor, which is an upgrade from last year's phone. And it's more interesting than just more pixels to represent your face. This time, Huawei is tapping into AI to map out a selfie and kind of balance out regions. So if you're in this kind of situation where you have a blown out bright background, your selfie will still light up the facial features and just, end up with a killer shot. Yes, a wide-angle lens is super useful when it comes to photography, but it also comes into its own with macro photography. If you want a really nice close-up of flowers or food or something else that you really want to see the texture of, that wide-angle lens is your choice. How does Huawei's night mode on the new P30 Pro fare against the Pixel 3's night sight? Well, to start, Google's low-light shooting mode, which captures several images at different exposures and magics them together, is faster. It typically took half the time of the P30 Pro. The results, though, are a close call. The P30 Pro seemed to mute the colours a little. Meanwhile, the Pixel 3 amped up the saturation a little bit beyond what I was looking at. At this early stage, I'd say the Pixel 3 still clinches it, but lacks the zooming capabilities of the P30 Pro. How does the P30 Pro fare in video? Well, it's better yet again than the phones we saw last year. Huawei is making the most of its new Super Spectrum 40 megapixel primary camera sensor. The new sensor is composed of a new red, yellow, yellow, blue sensor. Normally, it's made out of RGB, that's red, green, blue. It increases light by 40%, which means better low light photography and much improved video. And it's the zoom that really impressed me here in Paris. Both the hybrid 10x zoom and the optical 5x zoom is really good at keeping the subject in focus and pin sharp. Now, it's not perfect. There's some choppy transitions between those different degrees of zoom. But if you line up your shot correctly, get everything in frame, you're in for some spectacular video. You'll also notice how incredibly stable all this video footage looks. That's because there's dual OIS here. Not only is there optical image stabilization on the main 40 megapixel sensor, but also on the telephoto cam. On top of all that, there is also a layer of AI-assisted digital image stabilization. In short, it's smoothing out a lot of our filming crimes. You don't need a tripod or a gimbal to shoot killer footage with a P30 Pro. The time of flight camera also comes into effect here with video. Given that it's completely separate, it can help perform AI tricks, like this AI color option to give all of our filming this sexy, miserable Parisian effect. Cheer up, Steve. Thanks to that Super Spectrum sensor, it's also possible to film things at night, but the quality isn't quite as good as you're getting in daytime. We found big trouble keeping anything in focus at 10x hybrid zoom, and generally the resulting video was noisy and just not up to standard. So there's lots to play with, and in fact, this isn't actually everything Huawei pitched at its big P30 launch event. We weren't able to use the AR functions for measuring distance, length, and volume. There are other features like the dual view video camera mode, where you compare together both the wide angle lens and a more zoomed in close-up video, both together into a single video file. So is the P30 Pro a Pixel 3 beta? The boring answer is yes and no. The combination of a wide angle lens and 5x optical zoom is killer, let alone the 10x hybrid zoom. It's great for concerts, it's great for parties, it's great for portrait photography, it's great for nighttime photo shoots. And I was actually surprised how much the time of flight camera helps with the new portrait mode and just generally speeding up focus. So where does the Pixel 3 beat the P30 Pro? Reliability. While any of my tech friends or industry colleagues might be able to take a killer photo with the P30 Pro, it's a little bit harder to navigate through all those lenses, all those menus, and all those zooming options if you don't know what you're doing. I can hand Google's Pixel 3 to my mum or anyone who has no interest whatsoever in camera photography. And more often than not, they will be able to take a fantastic photo with minimal effort. That's not something I can say about the P30 Pro, unfortunately.